The coffee shop was nearly empty when Emma Chen checked her phone for the 14th time. 2 hours. She'd been sitting in the corner booth for 2 hours, watching couples come and go. Watching the barista wipe down the same counter 3 times. Watching her hopes slowly dissolve into the cold remains of her third latte. The evening light filtering through the windows had turned from gold to gray, and with it, something inside her had dimmed too. She shouldn't have been surprised. At 34, Emma had been through enough dating disasters to write a book, though she never would because who wanted to relive that kind of humiliation? But this one stung differently. Her best friend Rachel had set this up, had promised her that Michael was different, that he was kind and genuine and ready for something real. Rachel had been so sure, so insistent, that Emma had allowed herself to believe. She'd bought a new dress, nothing too fancy, just a simple navy blue sundress that made her feel pretty. She'd spent an hour on her makeup, getting the eyeliner just right. She'd even practiced what she might say, how she might laugh, imagining a connection that now felt foolish to have even dreamed about. The humiliation wasn't new, but it never got easier. Emma had learned to build walls around her heart, brick by careful brick, after her divorce 3 years ago. David had left her for someone younger, someone without the baggage of medical school debt and weekend shifts at the hospital, someone who didn't come home exhausted, smelling of antiseptic and illness. The divorce had been final on a Tuesday, and Emma had gone back to work on Wednesday because what else was there to do? Patience needed her. The ER didn't stop just because your heart was broken, but lately, the loneliness had started to feel heavier. She'd watch families in the hospital, fathers holding their daughters' hands, mothers whispering comfort to scared children, and something would ache in her chest. She wanted that. Not just romance, but connection, partnership, someone to come home to who actually wanted her there. Rachel had sensed it, had seen through Emma's cheerful deflections at their weekly brunches, and had insisted on setting up this blind date. And Emma, in a moment of weakness and wine-induced optimism, had agreed. Now, sitting alone with the pitying glances of strangers, she regretted everything. She pulled out her phone again, her finger hovering over Rachel's contact. She should call, should let her know that Michael had stood her up, that this whole thing had been a waste of time and hope. But the thought of saying it out loud, of admitting that she'd been foolish enough to believe again, made her throat tight. Emma gathered her purse, ready to leave, to go home and pretend this night had never happened. She was sliding out of the booth when the door chimed. She didn't look up. She couldn't bear to see another happy couple, another reminder of what she didn't have. But then she heard it. Small footsteps, hesitant and quick, followed by a child's voice, high and uncertain. "Is this the right place, Daddy?" Emma looked up despite herself. Standing just inside the doorway was a little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, with dark curly hair pulled into 2 slightly lopsided ponytails. She wore a purple jacket that had seen better days, and she was clutching a man's hand like it was the only solid thing in a tilting world. The man beside her looked equally nervous, tall and lean, with kind eyes that held a bone-deep exhaustion Emma recognized from her own mirror. He was scanning the coffee shop with an expression that mixed hope and dread in equal measure. When his eyes found Emma's, something shifted in his face. Recognition? Relief? She didn't know him, had never seen him before in her life, but he was moving toward her, gently guiding the little girl, and Emma's heart began to pound for reasons she couldn't explain. "Emma?" he said, his voice rough with something that might have been emotion. "I'm Marcus. I'm so sorry we're late. I know you've been waiting and I have no excuse except—" He paused, looking down at the little girl. "Except that life got complicated and I almost didn't come at all." Emma stared at him, confusion mixing with curiosity. This wasn't Michael. This man with the tired eyes and the daughter clinging to his hand wasn't the person she'd been waiting for. She should correct him, should explain the mistake, should gather her dignity and leave. But something in his expression stopped her. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, terrified of jumping but more terrified of staying still. "I'm not," Emma started, but the little girl was looking up at her with huge brown eyes, and whatever Emma had been about to say died in her throat. There was something in that gaze, something vulnerable and hopeful and scared, that made Emma's doctor instincts kick in. Something was wrong here, something beyond a simple mix-up. Marcus seemed to sense her hesitation. "Please," he said quietly, and that single word carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken things. "Please, just give me 5 minutes to explain. And then if you want to leave, I'll understand completely. But please, just 5 minutes." Emma should have said no. Every rational part of her brain was screaming at her to walk away, to not get involved in whatever complicated situation this clearly was. But she'd spent 2 hours waiting for someone who hadn't cared enough to show up. And now here was someone who looked like he'd moved heaven and earth just to be here. Even if he'd gotten the wrong person, and maybe it was the exhaustion of being stood up, or the loneliness she'd been trying so hard to ignore, or the way that little girl was looking at her like Emma might be the answer to something important. Maybe it was all of it or none of it. But Emma found herself sliding back into the booth, gesturing to the seats across from her. 5 minutes, she said softly. "But you owe me an explanation." Marcus's shoulders sagged with relief so profound it was almost physical. He helped the little girl into the booth, then sat beside her. And when he looked at Emma again, his eyes were swimming with something that looked dangerously close to tears. "Thank you," he whispered. And then he began to tell her a story that would change everything. Marcus's hands trembled slightly as he folded them on the table, and Emma noticed the details she'd missed in those first frantic moments. His clothes were clean but worn, a button-down shirt that had been ironed carefully, but showed the fading of too many washes. His watch was the kind you got for free with a bank account, not the expensive kind David used to wear. But it was his hands that told the real story. They were a working man's hands, calloused and strong, with a small scar across the knuckles and nails that were trimmed short and practical. These were hands that had built things, fixed things, held things together when they wanted to fall apart. The little girl, his daughter, sat pressed against his side, and Emma could see the resemblance now. Same dark curls, same deep brown eyes, same slightly pointed chin. But where Marcus looked exhausted, the girl looked wary, like a small animal that had learned the world wasn't always safe. "My name is Marcus Holloway," he began, his voice low and careful. "And this is my daughter, Sophie. We weren't supposed to be here tonight. I mean, technically I was supposed to be here, but not like this. Not 2 hours late, and definitely not with Sophie." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Emma suspected was habit when he was stressed. "God, I'm making a mess of this. Let me start over." Emma waited, her doctor's patience kicking in. She'd learned long ago that sometimes people needed space to find their words, especially when those words were hard to say. 3 months ago, Marcus continued, my wife, Sarah, died. Brain aneurysm. She was 33, healthy, no warning signs. She went to bed one night complaining of a headache and she never woke up. His voice cracked on the last word, and Sophie pressed closer to him, her small hand finding his. They'd done this before, Emma realized. This routine of comfort, of holding each other up when the grief tried to knock them down. Emma's heart clenched. "I'm so sorry," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. She'd seen death too many times in her work, had held the hands of people as they learned their loved ones weren't coming home. But knowing it professionally didn't make it any easier to witness personally. Marcus nodded, acknowledging her sympathy but not dwelling on it. He had more to say, and Emma could see he needed to get it out before he lost his nerve. Sarah's best friend Jenna set up this date. She's been worried about me, about us. Keeps saying we can't just shut ourselves away, that we need to start living again. I kept refusing, but she was relentless. Finally, I agreed, just to get her to stop. The date was supposed to be with her cousin Michelle, who apparently is very nice and very patient and very understanding of my situation. But I'm not Michelle, Emma said slowly. Pieces starting to fall into place. No, Marcus confirmed. Michelle was supposed to meet me here at 6. But at 5:30, everything fell apart. My babysitter, Mrs. Chen from down the street, the only person Sophie will stay with since Sarah died, she called. Her daughter went into labor early, and she had to go to the hospital. There was no one else. Sarah's parents live in Florida. My parents are both gone, and I don't have siblings. It was just us. He looked down at Sophie. I tried to cancel. I called Jenna, told her I couldn't make it, that we'd have to reschedule. And she said Michelle would understand, that we'd figure out another time. So why are you here? Emma asked gently. Marcus's eyes met hers, and what she saw there made her breath catch. It was desperation, raw and unfiltered, because Sophie heard me on the phone. She heard me cancel, heard me say I couldn't go, and she started crying, really crying, in a way she hasn't since the funeral. And she said, his voice broke again and he had to stop, had to breathe. Sophie's hand tightened on his. I said I was sorry, Sophie whispered, her voice so small Emma had to lean forward to hear it. I said I was sorry for making Daddy sad, for making him stop living. That's what Grandma said on the phone last week. She said Daddy stopped living when Mommy died, and it was making me stop living too. Emma felt something crack open in her chest. This child, this beautiful, hurting child, had been carrying that weight, believing she was somehow responsible for her father's grief, for the way their world had collapsed. I told her that wasn't true, Marcus said quickly. I told her none of this was her fault, that I loved her more than anything in the world. But she just kept crying, kept saying she wanted me to be happy again, even just a little bit. And then she said, he stopped, swallowing hard. She said she wanted to come with me, that if I went on the date, she'd know I was trying, that we were going to be okay. So you brought her, Emma finished. So I brought her, Marcus confirmed. But by the time I got her calmed down and dressed and convinced her she looked beautiful, because she was worried about looking nice for my date, this 8-year-old child was worried about making a good impression. By the time we got here, it was almost 8. I called Jenna from the car, but it went to voicemail. I called Michelle's number, the one Jenna had given me, but no answer. I figured she'd already left, that I'd blown it completely. But Sophie was looking at me with these eyes, these hopeful eyes, and I couldn't bear to let her down. So I thought maybe, just maybe, Michelle had waited. That maybe I could explain and apologize and show Sophie that even when things go wrong, you keep trying. But I'm not Michelle, Emma repeated, understanding flooding through her. You saw a woman sitting alone in a coffee shop at 8 o'clock, and you thought it was her. I thought it was a miracle, Marcus said simply. I thought you'd waited for me, even though I was unconscionably late. I thought maybe, just maybe, luck was on our side for once. He paused, really looking at her now. But you're not Michelle, are you? You're someone else who got stood up tonight. Someone who was waiting for someone who never came. Emma nodded slowly. Michael. Or supposedly Michael. I don't even know if that's his real name. My friend Rachel set it up. They sat in silence for a moment. Two strangers brought together by loneliness and mix-ups and the cruel comedy of timing. Emma should have been angry, should have felt manipulated or used. But instead, all she felt was a strange sense of connection. They'd both been abandoned tonight. Both been left waiting by people who hadn't cared enough to show up. But somehow they'd found each other in the wreckage. I should go, Marcus said, starting to slide out of the booth. I've taken up enough of your time, and you don't need to be burdened with our mess. I'm sorry for the confusion. I hope whoever Michael is, he realizes what an idiot he is for not showing up. Wait, Emma heard herself say. The word was out before she could think it through, before her rational mind could override her instinct. Marcus paused, hope flickering across his exhausted features. Sophie was looking at her too, those big eyes so full of fragile optimism, it made Emma's heart ache. Emma thought about going home to her empty apartment, to silence and Netflix and the same old loneliness. She thought about Marcus and Sophie going home to their house full of ghosts, to the absence that must fill every room. She thought about how life was supposed to be safe and predictable, about how she'd built her walls so high to protect herself from exactly this kind of complication. And then she thought about the little girl who'd convinced her grieving father to try living again. Even just a little bit, she thought about the man who'd shown up 2 hours late with his daughter in tow, not because he was careless, but because he was trying so hard to be both mother and father, to keep his family from drowning in loss. She thought about courage and what it really meant. Stay, Emma said, surprising herself as much as them. Stay and have coffee with me. I've been sitting here for 2 hours. Might as well make something good come from it. She looked at Sophie. Do you like hot chocolate? They make a really good one here, with whipped cream and everything. Sophie's eyes widened. She looked up at her father, silently asking permission. Marcus looked stunned, uncertain, like he couldn't quite believe what was happening. "Are you sure?" he asked Emma. "You don't have to do this. We're complete strangers." "So were you and Michelle supposed to be," Emma pointed out. "So were Michael and I. At least this way, no one's waiting alone anymore." Something in Marcus's expression shifted, softened. "Okay," he said quietly. "If you're sure, then okay. Thank you." Emma waved down the barista and ordered hot chocolate for Sophie, fresh coffee for Marcus and herself. As they waited, an awkward silence settled over the table, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of three people who'd been through their own private battles that day, who were tired and raw, and surprisingly grateful for unexpected company. When the drinks arrived, Sophie took a sip of her hot chocolate and got whipped cream on her nose. Emma smiled without thinking, and Sophie smiled back, tentative but real. And Marcus, watching them both, felt something in his chest loosen just slightly. Not healing, not yet, but maybe, just maybe, the first tiny crack in the wall of grief he'd been living behind. They began to talk, carefully at first, then with growing ease. Emma asked about Sophie's school. Learned she loved art class and hated math. Sophie asked if Emma was a teacher, and when Emma explained she was a doctor, Sophie's eyes went wide with interest. Marcus talked about his work as an electrician, about the satisfaction of fixing things, making broken systems whole again. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. As the evening deepened outside and the coffee shop began to close, Emma realized something had shifted. She'd come here looking for a date, for potential romance, for someone to fill the empty spaces in her life. Instead, she'd found something she hadn't known she needed, a reminder that she wasn't alone in her loneliness, that pain and hope could exist in the same moment, that sometimes the best connections came from the most unexpected places. When they finally stood to leave, Marcus's gratitude was written in every line of his face. "Thank you," he said again, "for being kind when you had every right not to be." "Thank you," Emma countered, "for showing up, even if it was to the wrong person." She looked at Sophie. "And thank you for being brave enough to help your dad try." Sophie beamed, a real smile that lit up her whole face, and Emma felt that crack in her own walls widen just a bit more. They exchanged numbers, just in case, they said, though neither was quite sure in case of what. And then Marcus and Sophie headed into the night, hand in hand, while Emma watched them go. She should have felt disappointed about Michael, about another failed attempt at dating, but instead, driving home through the dark streets, Emma felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Possibility. Not romance, not yet, maybe not ever with Marcus, but the possibility that there were still good people in the world, still moments of grace in the midst of mess, still reasons to keep showing up even when everything went wrong. She didn't know it yet, but in that coffee shop, through a mix-up and a 2-hour wait, something had begun. Not a fairy tale, not a perfect love story, but something real, something human, something that might just save them all. The text came 3 days later, on a Sunday morning when Emma was halfway through her second cup of coffee and trying not to think about the empty day stretching ahead. Her phone buzzed against the kitchen counter, and she almost ignored it. Probably Rachel again, apologizing for the 100th time about Michael, who'd apparently gotten the date wrong and shown up on Friday instead of Thursday. A mix-up Emma had decided wasn't worth the energy to unpack. But the notification wasn't from Rachel. It was from a number saved simply as Marcus H. "Sophie made you something. She's been working on it all weekend. Would it be weird if we dropped it off? No pressure at all. Just thought you might like to see it." Emma stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the screen. The rational part of her brain, the part that had built those careful walls, whispered that this was a bad idea. Getting involved with a widower and his grieving daughter wasn't what she'd signed up for. This was complicated in ways she couldn't even begin to untangle. The smart thing would be to politely decline, to let that one evening remain what it was, a pleasant anomaly in otherwise disappointing lives. But there was another part of her, quieter but more insistent, that remembered Sophie's tentative smile, that remembered the way Marcus's shoulders had relaxed as they'd talked, how the exhaustion in his eyes had lifted just slightly when Sophie laughed at one of Emma's terrible hospital jokes. That remembered how she'd felt driving home that night, less alone than she had in months. Not weird at all, she typed back. I'd love to see it. I'm home all day. The response came quickly. We'll be there in an hour if that works. Sophie's already pulling on her shoes. Emma looked around her apartment, the neat, sterile space that always felt more like a waiting room than a home. She'd decorated in neutrals after the divorce, had removed every trace of David, and hadn't bothered to replace those traces with anything personal. No photos on the walls, no knickknacks on the shelves. Just clean lines and empty spaces and nothing that could hurt her if it disappeared. Suddenly it felt unbearably sad. She found herself rushing to add touches of life to the place, moving her favorite books from the shelf to the coffee table, pulling out the colorful throw blanket her mother had sent last Christmas that she'd never used, putting fresh flowers in a vase even though no one would care but her. By the time the doorbell rang, she was slightly out of breath and questioning every choice she'd made in the last hour. Sophie stood in the hallway clutching a large piece of poster board, her face a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Marcus stood behind her, looking apologetic. We won't stay long, he promised. Sophie just really wanted to give this to you herself. Please come in, Emma said, stepping back. As they entered, she saw Sophie's eyes widen, taking in everything with the intense observation of a child. Emma wondered what she saw, if the apartment felt as cold and empty to her as it suddenly felt to Emma. Your place is really clean, Sophie said, and Emma couldn't tell if it was a compliment or an observation. Our house is messier. Daddy tries, but he's not as good at organizing as Mommy was. There was a moment of painful silence. Marcus's face tightened, and Emma could see him struggling with whether to correct Sophie, to redirect the conversation away from the loss that still felt so fresh. But Emma knelt down to Sophie's level instead. I think clean is overrated, she said gently. A house should feel lived in, you know? Should have art on the fridge and books left open and signs that people actually do things there. This place, she gestured around, it's too clean. It doesn't feel like anyone really lives here. Just exists, Sophie considered this seriously. That makes sense, she said. Then with the abrupt subject change only children can pull off gracefully, she held up the poster board. I made this for you. Daddy said you might not have space for it, but I wanted you to have it anyway. Emma took the poster board carefully, and her breath caught. It was a drawing, clearly done with crayons and markers and the intense focus of a child who cared deeply about getting it right. The scene showed a coffee shop, recognizable by the cups and counter drawn in careful detail. 3 figures sat at a table, a woman with dark hair, Emma recognized herself, a tall man and a small girl. Above them, Sophie had written in careful letters, "The day we all stopped being alone." Emma felt her throat close up. She blinked rapidly, trying to keep the tears at bay, but it was useless. One spilled over, then another, and suddenly she was crying. Not sad tears, but something more complicated. Relief, maybe. Or recognition. Or the overwhelming realization that she'd been lying to herself about how okay she was. I'm sorry, Sophie said, alarmed. I didn't mean to make you sad. Daddy, I made her sad. No, sweetheart, Emma managed, wiping at her eyes. No, you didn't make me sad. This is beautiful. This is the most beautiful thing anyone's given me in a long time. I'm crying because it's happy, not sad. Does that make sense? Sophie nodded slowly, though she still looked uncertain. Marcus had gone very still, watching Emma with an expression she couldn't quite read. Sophie's been processing a lot through art, he said quietly. Her school counselor suggested it. This week she's been drawing that night over and over, trying to work through what it meant. What did it mean? Emma asked Sophie directly. To you, I mean. What was special about that night? Sophie thought about it, her face scrunched up in concentration. Daddy smiled, she said finally. Really smiled. Not the pretend smile he does when he's sad but trying not to show me. And you looked at us like we weren't broken. Everyone else looks at us like we're broken, but you just looked at us like we were people. Emma felt something shift in her chest, those walls cracking wider. You're not broken, she said firmly. You're hurt and that's different. Hurt can heal, and you're both trying so hard and that's brave and that's what matters. Marcus cleared his throat roughly. "I should have called first," he said. "This is too much, too fast. You barely know us, and we're showing up at your apartment on a Sunday with emotional artwork. This must seem insane." "It does," Emma admitted, and then laughed at the surprised look on his face. "It does seem insane. I don't do this. I don't let people in. I certainly don't let complicated people in. I spent 3 years building my life into something safe and predictable and manageable." She looked at the drawing in her hands. "But maybe that's not living. Maybe that's just existing, like I said. And maybe insane is exactly what I need." "What are you saying?" Marcus asked carefully. Emma wasn't entirely sure herself. She only knew that looking at this man and his daughter, at the courage it took for them to keep showing up to life, even when life had devastated them, made her want to try too. Made her want to risk the walls she'd built so carefully. "I'm saying don't go yet," she said. "Stay for coffee or tea. Or I could make lunch. I actually cook when I have a reason to, which isn't often. Stay, and let's just see what happens when we're not sitting in a coffee shop full of strangers." Sophie's face lit up, but Marcus hesitated. "Emma, I need you to understand something," he said. "We're a package deal, Sophie and me. I'm not looking to date casually or to find someone just for me. If we do this, whatever this is, it involves both of us. And that's a lot to ask of anyone." "I know," Emma said. And she did. She wasn't naive about what she might be stepping into, but she also knew what the alternative was. Going back to her empty apartment, her empty days, her safe and predictable and desperately lonely life. "I'm not asking for promises or commitments or anything beyond just trying. But I like you both. I like how you are together, and I'd like to know you better if you'll let me." Marcus looked at Sophie, some silent communication passing between them. Then Sophie nodded enthusiastically, and Marcus's tension finally eased. "Okay," he said. "Lunch sounds great. But fair warning, Sophie's going through a phase where she only eats chicken nuggets shaped like dinosaurs." "I'm a doctor," Emma countered. "I once performed an emergency procedure with only a flashlight and a pocket knife. I think I can handle dinosaur-shaped chicken nuggets." And just like that, the afternoon that Emma had been dreading transformed into something unexpected. She found herself in her kitchen, the kitchen that never saw visitors, making grilled cheese sandwiches because she didn't actually have dinosaur nuggets. Sophie sat at the counter, telling elaborate stories about her third-grade class, while Marcus helped with a comfort in her space that should have felt invasive, but instead felt natural. They talked about everything and nothing. Marcus told her about learning to do Sophie's hair, about YouTube tutorials watched at 2 in the morning because Sophie had a school picture the next day, and he couldn't figure out how to make a proper ponytail. Emma shared stories from the ER, carefully edited for an 8-year-old audience, about the strange things people came in for. Sophie showed Emma her favorite drawing app on Marcus's phone. The two of them bent together over the screen while Marcus watched with something soft and grateful in his expression. It wasn't a date. It wasn't romance or courtship or any of the things Emma had been looking for on that blind date. It was simpler and more complicated than that. It was connection, real and human and messy. It was the sound of Sophie's laughter in a space that had been silent for too long. It was Marcus's surprise when Emma mentioned her own mother's death from cancer 5 years ago, the understanding that passed between them of loss's particular weight. It was discovering shared loves of old movies and terrible puns, and the specific comfort of diners at midnight. When they finally left, as the afternoon faded toward evening, Emma felt wrung out and energized all at once. She stood at her door watching them walk to Marcus's slightly battered truck, watching him buckle Sophie carefully into her booster seat, watching them drive away. The apartment felt different now, still too clean, still too empty, but less like a mausoleum and more like a space waiting to be filled. Her phone buzzed again as she was washing dishes. Another message from Marcus. "Thank you for today. Sophie hasn't stopped talking about you. Says you're magic because you made her grilled cheese taste like sunshine. Whatever you did, you made us both feel normal for a few hours. That's a gift." Emma stared at the message, thinking about how to respond, what to say that would be honest without being too much. Finally, she settled on simple truth. "You made me feel less alone." That's a gift, too. She hung Sophie's drawing on her refrigerator, the first thing she'd put there in 3 years. And looking at it, at those 3 figures around a table, at the careful letters declaring they'd all stopped being alone, Emma allowed herself to hope. Just a little, that maybe this story wasn't over yet, that maybe it was just beginning. The text messages started small and stayed that way. Little updates, photos Sophie wanted to share, questions about whether Emma knew any good child therapists, because Sophie's school counselor had suggested additional support. Nothing too intimate, nothing that crossed lines, but a steady thread of communication that wove itself into Emma's days until she realized she was checking her phone more, smiling at random moments, existing in the world differently than she had in years. 3 weeks after that Sunday lunch, Marcus texted on a Thursday evening, "Emergency. Sophie's school science fair is tomorrow, and her volcano just exploded. Like actually exploded, not in the good demonstration way. There's baking soda and vinegar everywhere, including on the dog we don't have. Any chance you know anything about volcanoes?" Emma had just gotten off a brutal 12-hour shift. Her feet hurt, her head hurt, and she smelled like the particular combination of antiseptic and exhaustion that defined her workdays. The smart thing would be to send a sympathetic message and suggest he look up tutorials online. Instead, she found herself texting back, "I'll be there in 20 minutes. I'm not saying I'm a volcano expert, but I did nail my own 6th grade science fair." She showed up at Marcus's house for the first time still wearing her scrubs. Her hair pulled back in a messy bun. No makeup. Running on caffeine and autopilot. The house was in a quiet neighborhood. Older homes with big trees and lived-in lawns. Marcus's place was a small ranch style, painted a faded blue with a porch that looked like it had been repaired multiple times. The yard needed mowing, and there were children's toys scattered near the door. But something about it felt warm, in a way Emma's sterile apartment never had. Marcus answered on the first knock, looking frazzled. His hair stuck up in several directions, and he had what appeared to be red food coloring on his shirt. "You actually came," he said, relief flooding his face. "I was joking, well, half joking. You must be exhausted." "Exhaustion is my natural state," Emma said, stepping inside. "Where's the patient?" Sophie came running from what Emma assumed was the kitchen, wearing safety goggles and an expression of pure distress. "It was supposed to look like a real volcano," she wailed. "But instead it exploded sideways and got lava. It's not real lava. Just the red stuff, all over Mommy's recipe book. And now Daddy's upset and everything is ruined." Emma caught the details in Sophie's outburst, the pieces that explained Marcus's tension. This wasn't just about a science project. It was about Sarah's recipe book, about one more piece of her mother that Sophie had accidentally damaged, about the impossible burden this child carried of trying to move forward, while also preserving every remnant of the past. "Hey," Emma said, kneeling down to Sophie's level. "First rule of science, experiments fail. That's literally the point. Thomas Edison failed 1,000 times before he got the light bulb right. Failures are just data. They teach us what not to do next time. But the recipe book," Sophie's eyes filled with tears, "is probably fine," Emma said gently. "Paper is surprisingly resilient. We'll look at it together, okay? But right now, we need to focus on making the best volcano this science fair has ever seen. Deal?" Sophie nodded, wiping at her eyes. Behind her, Marcus mouthed, "Thank you," with an expression that made Emma's chest tight. She followed them to the kitchen, which looked like a science experiment had indeed exploded. There was colored water on the counter, papier-mâché scattered across the table, and in the corner, looking worse for wear, was what remained of Sophie's volcano. For the next 3 hours, Emma helped them rebuild. She showed Sophie how to reinforce the structure, how to create a proper baking soda and vinegar ratio, how to control the flow with careful measurement. Marcus assisted, following Emma's instructions, and gradually the tension in his shoulders eased. Sophie became absorbed in the work, her earlier distress forgotten in the focus of creation. It was past 10 when they finally finished. The new volcano sat on the kitchen table, respectable and stable, ready for its demonstration. Sophie was yawning, her eyes drooping despite her excitement. "It's perfect," she said, looking at their work with satisfaction. "Thank you, Emma, you really are magic." Just science, Emma said, but she was smiling. Now, you need to get to bed. Big day tomorrow. Marcus carried a protesting but exhausted Sophie to her room, leaving Emma alone in the kitchen. She found herself looking around, taking in the details she'd missed before. Photos on the fridge, some old ones of Marcus, Sarah and baby Sophie, but newer ones too. Sophie's artwork. Marcus and Sophie at what looked like a baseball game. A report card with straight A's. Sarah's recipe book sat on the counter, and Emma carefully examined it. The pages were stained but intact, the damage minimal. Just a few spots of red food coloring that would probably fade with time. On the counter, she noticed something else. A calendar, marked up with appointments. Sophie's therapy sessions every Tuesday. Marcus's work schedule, carefully blocked out. Dad-daughter movie night written in for every Friday. PTA meetings, dental appointments. Reminders to buy Sophie new shoes because she was growing so fast. This was a life, fully lived and carefully managed by someone doing everything alone. Marcus returned quietly, finding Emma standing in his kitchen looking at his calendar like it held secrets. "That's the command center," he said with a tired smile. "If it's not on the calendar, it doesn't exist." I learned that the hard way after missing Sophie's dentist appointment 2 months in a row. "You're doing an incredible job," Emma said, and meant it. "This house, Sophie, keeping everything together. Marcus, you're doing an incredible job." Something in his face crumpled slightly, and Emma realized these might be words he hadn't heard in a long time. "Most days I feel like I'm barely holding on," he admitted. "Like I'm one forgotten lunch or missed permission slip away from everything falling apart." Sarah was the organized one. She was the one who remembered everything, planned everything. "I'm just improvising and hoping Sophie doesn't realize how much I'm faking it. She knows you love her," Emma said. "That's what matters. The rest, that's just logistics. You'll figure it out, will I?" Marcus leaned against the counter, exhaustion written in every line of his body. "Some days I'm not sure. Some days I wake up and for just a second I forget she's gone. I turn to tell Sarah something, or I hear a sound and think it's her in the shower, and then I remember, and it's like losing her all over again. And then I feel guilty because I'm supposed to be moving forward for Sophie. But how do you move forward when part of you is still stuck in that hospital room, watching the person you love disappear?" Emma moved closer, her own experiences with loss rising to the surface. "You don't move forward," she said quietly. "That's not how grief works. You move around it, through it, with it. It becomes part of your landscape, and some days it's a mountain you can't see past, and other days it's just there in the background. But it doesn't go away, and you shouldn't feel guilty about that." Marcus looked at her, really looked at her, and Emma saw the moment something shifted between them. This wasn't just friendship anymore, wasn't just two lonely people finding comfort in each other's company. This was something deeper, more dangerous. This was the kind of connection that could hurt when it ended, and Emma's instinct was to run before it could. But she didn't run. She stayed in that kitchen with its cluttered counters and calendar full of life, and she let Marcus see her own vulnerability. "When my mom died," she found herself saying, "I threw myself into work. 100-hour weeks, double shifts, anything to not have to go home and face the silence. My marriage was already falling apart, but her death was the final straw. David wanted me to grieve on his timeline, to process it in a way that was convenient for him. When I couldn't, when I was still crying at random moments months later, he decided I was too broken to fix. And maybe I believed him. Maybe I've spent these 3 years believing I was too broken, too damaged, too much work for anyone to want to deal with." "Emma," Marcus started, but she shook her head. "Let me finish," she said. "I need to say this because I think you need to hear it, and I need to say it out loud. You're not faking it. You're not barely holding on. You're a man who loves his daughter so much that he rebuilt a volcano at 10 o'clock at night because it mattered to her. You're someone who shows up, even when it's hard, even when you're exhausted, even when you're grieving. That's not weakness. That's the strongest thing I've ever seen." The kitchen fell silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of Sophie's sound machine from her bedroom. Marcus was looking at Emma like he was seeing her for the first time, or maybe like he was finally letting himself see what had been there all along. "I need to tell you something," he said finally. "And I need you to know I'm not saying it to make you uncomfortable or to pressure you into anything. But I need to be honest because I promised myself, after Sarah died, that I wouldn't waste time on things that didn't matter, that I wouldn't hide from truth just because it was scary." Emma's heart was pounding, but she nodded. "Okay. That night at the coffee shop, when I thought you were Michelle, I was planning to go through the motions. Say the right things, be polite, maybe agree to one more date to make Jenna happy and then let it fade away. I wasn't looking for anything real. I wasn't ready for anything real." He paused, gathering courage. "But then I talked to you and you were kind to Sophie. And you saw us, really saw us, and something woke up in me that I thought had died with Sarah. And these past few weeks, getting to know you, watching you with Sophie, seeing how you show up even when you're exhausted, even when you have every reason to protect yourself, Emma, I'm falling for you. And that terrifies me because I swore I'd never feel this way about anyone again. But here you are, standing in my kitchen at 10:30 at night helping with a science project. And I can't pretend I don't feel it." Emma couldn't breathe. This was the moment she should run, should protect herself, should say something about needing time or space or any of the dozen excuses she'd perfected over the years. But looking at Marcus, at the vulnerability in his eyes, at the courage it took to risk his heart again after it had been so completely shattered, she found she didn't want to run. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I'm so scared, Marcus. What if I can't be what Sophie needs? What if I let you both down? What if this falls apart and it hurts all of us? What if it doesn't?" Marcus countered. "What if it's exactly what we all need? What if being scared is just proof that it matters?" Emma thought about Sophie's drawing on her refrigerator, about the words, "the day we all stopped being alone." She thought about how her apartment had felt less empty after they'd visited, how her days had felt more meaningful with their texts to look forward to. She thought about the walls she'd built and how exhausting it was to maintain them, how lonely it was to be safe. "I'm falling for you too," she admitted, the words both terrifying and freeing. "For both of you. For the way you love her so fiercely. For the way she's so brave even when she's scared. For the way you both make me want to try again, to risk again. To believe that maybe broken people can find each other and make something whole." Marcus closed the distance between them slowly, giving her time to pull back if she wanted to. But Emma didn't pull back. When he reached for her hand, she let him take it, let him pull her closer. When he cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing her cheek, she leaned into the touch. And when he kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise, she kissed him back, letting herself fall into the terrifying, wonderful possibility of what they could become. They stood in that kitchen for a long moment, holding each other, two broken people finding unexpected wholeness in their shared damage. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't a fairy tale, but it was real, and it was theirs, and it was a beginning. When they finally pulled apart, Emma smiled. "I should go home. You both need sleep and I have an early shift tomorrow." "Okay," Marcus said, but he didn't let go of her hand. "Emma, thank you for showing up, for staying, for taking a chance on us." "Thank you," she replied, "for asking me to." Driving home that night, Emma felt different. The fear was still there. She'd be lying if she said otherwise. But alongside it was something else, hope. Real, fragile, precious hope that maybe she'd found what she'd been looking for all along. Not in a planned blind date or a carefully arranged meeting, but in a chaotic coffee shop mix-up with a widower and his daughter, who were both trying so hard to keep living. Her phone buzzed as she pulled into her parking lot. A text from Marcus. "Sophie wants to know if you'll come to her science fair tomorrow. No pressure, but if you can, she'd love to have you there. We both would." Emma stared at the message, thinking about all the reasons she should say no, should keep some distance, should protect herself. Then she thought about Sophie's face when the volcano had finally worked, about Marcus's expression when he'd kissed her, about that drawing on her refrigerator. "What time?" She texted back, "I'll be there," because sometimes the scariest thing and the right thing were the same thing, and Emma was finally ready to be brave. The school gymnasium was packed with parents, children, and science projects of varying quality. Emma arrived 15 minutes before the judging started, scanning the crowd for familiar faces. She spotted them near the back corner. Sophie standing proudly beside her volcano, which was now decorated with additional trees and tiny plastic dinosaurs. Marcus was crouched beside her, making some last-minute adjustment, his face focused and serious. Emma made her way through the crowd, and when Sophie saw her, the little girl's entire face lit up. "Emma, you came. Daddy said you might be too busy, but I knew you'd come." "Wouldn't miss it," Emma said, and realized it was true. 24 hours ago, she'd have said she couldn't possibly take time off for a child's science fair. Now, looking at Sophie's joy, she couldn't imagine being anywhere else. Marcus stood, his smile warm and slightly nervous. "You made it." "I made it," Emma confirmed. There was a weight to the words, an understanding that she wasn't just talking about the science fair. She'd made it past her own fears, past the walls she'd built, past the voice that said this was too complicated and too risky. The judging began, and Emma watched as Sophie demonstrated her volcano with the confidence of someone who'd rebuilt it from disaster. The eruption was perfect, not too violent, not too tame, just right. The judges asked questions, and Sophie answered them clearly, even mentioning how Dr. Emma had helped her understand the chemical reaction better. When the judges moved on, Sophie grabbed Emma's hand. "Do you think I'll win?" "I think you already won," Emma said, "because you didn't give up when it got hard. That's what real science is, trying, failing, learning, and trying again." Sophie considered this, then nodded seriously. "Like how Daddy and I are learning to live without Mommy. We fail sometimes, but we keep trying." The words were so matter-of-fact, so honest, that Emma felt her throat tighten. "Exactly like that," she managed. "And you're both doing such a good job." They didn't win first place. That went to a complicated project about solar energy with lights and panels and a working model house. But Sophie got an honorable mention for Most Improved Project Process, which the judge explained was for students who showed exceptional problem-solving and resilience. Sophie beamed as if she'd won the Nobel Prize. Afterward, Marcus suggested ice cream, and they found themselves at a small shop near the school, sitting in a booth that was slightly too small for 3 people. Sophie got a sundae with far too many toppings and proceeded to tell them about every other project at the fair in exhaustive detail. Emma and Marcus exchanged smiles over her head, a silent conversation of shared affection and amusement. But as Sophie wound down, licking melted ice cream from her spoon, her expression turned serious. "Emma, can I ask you something?" "Of course," Emma said, though she felt Marcus tense beside her. "Are you going to be my daddy's girlfriend?" The question hung in the air, innocent and yet loaded with so much meaning. Emma saw Marcus's panic, saw him about to intervene, to tell Sophie that was inappropriate or too soon. But Emma reached under the table and squeezed his hand, then looked at Sophie directly. "I'd like to be," she said honestly, "if that's okay with you. I know it's complicated, and I know you miss your mommy very much. I'm not trying to replace her. No one could ever do that. But I care about you and your dad, and I'd like to be part of your lives if you'll have me." Sophie's face scrunched up in thought. "My friend Maya's parents are divorced, and her dad has a girlfriend. Maya says she doesn't like her because she tries too hard to be her friend, and it feels fake." "That makes sense," Emma said. "Would it help if I promised not to try too hard? To just be myself and let us figure out how we fit together naturally?" "Yes," Sophie said. Then after a pause, "But you're already my friend. So maybe you can be Daddy's girlfriend and my friend at the same time." "I think that sounds perfect," Emma said, relief flooding through her. Sophie nodded, satisfied, and went back to her ice cream. Marcus was looking at Emma with such raw emotion that it made her chest ache. Later, he would tell her that was the moment he knew he loved her. Not the kiss in the kitchen, not the help with the volcano, but this moment of gentle honesty with his daughter, this willingness to meet Sophie where she was without pretense or pressure. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm that felt both new and inevitable. Emma started coming over for dinner once or twice a week, bringing groceries and cooking meals that gradually filled Sarah's recipe book with new memories alongside the old ones. She taught Sophie to make her mother's famous chocolate chip cookies, a recipe Emma's mom had passed down, and watched as the little girl carefully wrote it in the back of Sarah's book with a note, "From Emma's mommy to our family." Marcus started showing up at the hospital on Emma's late shifts, bringing her coffee and sitting with her during her breaks. He never asked her to talk about the hard cases, the patients she couldn't save, the weight she carried home. He just sat with her, a steady presence that said she didn't have to be strong alone, but it wasn't all smooth. There were hard moments, like when Sophie had a nightmare about losing Marcus too, and wouldn't let him out of her sight for days, and Emma had to step back and let them have their space. Or when Marcus's mother-in-law called, still raw with her own grief, and said she wasn't ready to meet Emma yet, wasn't ready to see Marcus with someone new. Emma had cried in her car after that call, questioning whether she had any right to be in their lives, whether she was causing more pain than healing. Marcus found her there, in the hospital parking lot, tears streaming down her face. He got into the passenger seat and just held her, not offering platitudes or easy answers. "This is hard," he said finally. "It's going to be hard sometimes. Sarah's parents are grieving, and they may never fully accept us moving forward. My coworkers still look at me with pity. Sophie's going to have rough days where she resents any woman who isn't her mother. And I'm going to have moments where the guilt tries to drown me, where I wonder if I'm betraying Sarah's memory by falling in love again. Then why are we doing this?" Emma asked, her voice small. "Because the alternative is worse," Marcus said simply. "Because being alone was killing me slowly, and now I have a reason to actually live, not just survive. Because Sophie laughs more now, and draws pictures of the three of us, and talks about the future in a way she hasn't since Sarah died. Because you make us better, Emma. You make us whole in ways we didn't know we were still broken." Emma leaned into him, letting his words sink in, letting herself believe them. "You make me better too," she whispered. "You make me brave." 3 months after that science fair, Emma stood in front of her bathroom mirror at 6 in the morning, staring at the pregnancy test in her shaking hands. 2 lines. Positive, impossible, except it wasn't. Nothing was impossible. She was a doctor, she knew the statistics, knew that birth control wasn't 100% effective, knew that life had a way of happening despite the best laid plans. She sat on the edge of the bathtub, trying to process. She and Marcus had been careful, or careful enough. They hadn't talked about kids, about future kids, about whether Marcus even wanted more children after everything he'd been through with Sophie. This was too soon, too fast, too much. Her phone rang. Marcus calling to say good morning like he did every day before work. Emma stared at it, paralyzed. She should wait to tell him, should figure out what she wanted first, should have a plan. But they'd promised each other honesty, had built their relationship on showing up even when it was scary. She answered, "Marcus, I need to tell you something and I need you not to panic. But I'm panicking enough for both of us. So maybe that's not helpful advice." "Emma, breathe," he said, immediately concerned. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" "I'm pregnant," she blurted out. "I took a test this morning because I've been feeling off. And it's positive, and I know we haven't talked about this. And I know it's too soon. And I don't even know what I want to do. But I needed you to know because we promised honesty. And I can't carry this alone, and where are you?" Marcus interrupted gently. "Home, in my bathroom. Having a minor breakdown. I'm coming over. Give me 15 minutes. Don't move, don't spiral, just breathe." He made it in 12 minutes. Emma heard his key in the lock. She'd given him a key last month, a gesture that had felt monumental at the time and now seemed like nothing compared to this. He found her still in the bathroom, still holding the test, still trying to wrap her mind around the reality of it. Marcus sat beside her on the bathroom floor, not speaking at first, just being present. Finally, he said, "Tell me what you're feeling. All of it. No filter." Emma took a shaky breath. "Scared. Terrified, actually. We've only been together a few months. This isn't how it's supposed to happen. I'm 47. I thought that ship had sailed and I'd made peace with that. My career is demanding. I barely sleep as it is. And Sophie, God, Marcus, Sophie. How do we tell an 8-year-old who's still grieving her mother that there's going to be a new baby? What if she thinks we're trying to replace Sarah, trying to build a new family that erases the old one? What if this breaks everything we've been building?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing. When he spoke, his voice was steady. Those are all valid fears, every single one of them. And I'd be lying if I said I wasn't scared too. I'm terrified. But Emma, I need you to know something. He took her hand, the one not holding the test. I love you. I'm in love with you. I have been for weeks, maybe longer, but I wasn't sure when to say it. And if you decide you don't want this, that it's too much too soon, I'll support you completely. But if you're asking whether I want this, baby, whether I want a future with you that includes all the messiness and complications and beautiful chaos that comes with it, the answer is yes. Absolutely yes. Emma stared at him, tears spilling over. You want this? I want you, Marcus said. And everything that comes with you. Yes, it's complicated. Yes, it's scary. Yes, we'll have to navigate Sophie's feelings and probably 1,000 other challenges we haven't even thought of yet. But Emma, life is always complicated. We don't get to choose the timing or the circumstances. We only get to choose how we respond to them. I think I want this, Emma whispered. I think I'm terrified and overwhelmed and completely unprepared, but I think I want this. I want us. I want the family we're becoming, even if it looks nothing like what I imagined. Marcus pulled her close, and they sat on that bathroom floor holding each other, two people who'd been broken in different ways, finding strength in their shared vulnerability. After a while, Emma's practical doctor brain kicked in. I need to see my OB/GYN. Get proper confirmation, start prenatal vitamins. At my age, this is automatically considered high risk, which means more monitoring, more appointments. We'll figure it out, Marcus said. One step at a time. Together. The word together settled something in Emma's chest. She wasn't alone in this. She wasn't facing the fear and uncertainty by herself. Whatever came next, they would navigate it as a team. Telling Sophie was harder than Emma had imagined. They waited 2 weeks, until after Emma's first prenatal appointment confirmed everything was progressing normally. They chose a Saturday afternoon, taking Sophie to the park, neutral ground, Marcus called it, somewhere she could process without feeling trapped. They sat on a bench while Sophie played on the swings, and when she came back, breathless and happy, Marcus pulled her onto his lap. Sweetheart, Emma and I need to talk to you about something important, something that's going to change our family. Sophie's expression immediately shifted to worried. Are you going away? She asked Emma, fear sharp in her voice. Are you leaving like Mommy did? No, Emma said quickly, her heart breaking at the child's fear. No, I'm not leaving, I promise. But something is changing, and we wanted you to know about it because you're part of this family, and your feelings matter to us. Marcus took a breath. Emma's going to have a baby. You're going to have a little brother or sister. Sophie went very still, processing. The silence stretched long enough that Emma's anxiety spiked. Then Sophie asked, Is it going to live with us? Yes, Marcus said. The baby will be part of our family. But Sophie, that doesn't change how much I love you. You're my daughter, my first baby, and nothing, no one will ever replace you in my heart. Will Emma be too busy with the new baby to be my friend anymore? The question gutted Emma. She slid off the bench and knelt in front of Sophie, taking the little girl's hands. Sophie, I will always have time for you, always. You were my friend first, and you'll be my friend forever. This baby doesn't change that. We're just expanding our family, making more room for more love. Love doesn't run out, sweetie. It just grows. Sophie's eyes filled with tears. I miss my mommy, she said, and it came out as a sob. I want my mommy. And I know she's not coming back. And sometimes I forget what she looked like. And I'm scared I'm going to forget her completely if we have a new baby. Marcus gathered his daughter close, his own tears falling now. You won't forget her. We won't let you forget her. Mommy will always be your mommy, always. And she'd want you to be happy, to let new people love you, to have a full, beautiful life. She'd want that for all of us. They sat in the park for a long time, the three of them holding each other while Sophie cried. Emma cried too, for this child's loss, for the mother she'd never known, for the complexity of loving a family that came with such profound grief woven into its fabric. Eventually, Sophie's tears subsided. She pulled back, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Can I help pick out baby stuff?" she asked in a small voice. "Absolutely," Emma said. "You can help with everything. You're the big sister. That's a really important job. And I can teach the baby things, like how to draw and stuff?" "Yes," Marcus said. "You can teach the baby so much, you're going to be the best big sister." Sophie nodded slowly, seeming to accept this new reality. Then, with the resilience of, "Children," she asked if they could get ice cream. And just like that, the moment shifted. Not resolved exactly. There would be more conversations, more processing, more adjustments ahead. But they'd taken the first step together. The pregnancy progressed, with all the complications Emma's age suggested it might. There were extra appointments, monitoring. A scare at 20 weeks that turned out to be nothing but age them all by years. Emma worked reduced hours, something she'd never imagined doing, but her priorities had shifted. Sophie came to an ultrasound appointment and saw her baby brother for the first time. They decided to find out the gender and declared that he looked like an alien, but a cute alien. Marcus's mother-in-law finally agreed to meet Emma when she was 6 months pregnant. It was awkward and painful, sitting across from this woman who looked at Emma like she was an interloper, a replacement for her daughter. But by the end of the lunch, there was a tentative understanding. "I'll never be happy Sarah is gone," she'd said to Emma, "and I'll never fully be okay with Marcus moving on. But I can see that you love them, that you're trying to honor Sarah's memory while building something new. For Sophie's sake, I can try to accept that." It wasn't perfect, but it was something, more than Emma had hoped for. On a cold February night when Emma was 37 weeks pregnant and huge and exhausted, Marcus asked her to marry him. They were in her apartment, their apartment now, since Marcus and Sophie had officially moved in 2 months ago, transforming her sterile space into something vibrant and lived in. Sophie was asleep in her new room, the one they'd painted purple together, and Marcus and Emma were on the couch, Emma's feet in his lap as he rubbed away the aches of late pregnancy. "I know we've done everything backward," Marcus said, suddenly nervous. "Baby before marriage, moving in before proper dating, falling in love in a matter of weeks instead of years. But I don't care about doing things the traditional way. I care about you, about us, about the family we're building." "Emma Chen, will you marry me?" He didn't have a ring. They'd talked about rings, about how Emma preferred simple things, about how they'd pick one out together. But he had his heart in his hands, offering it completely. "Yes," Emma said, laughing and crying at once. "Yes, absolutely yes." They married quickly, quietly, at City Hall 3 weeks before Emma's due date. Just them, Sophie, Rachel, Jenna, and a handful of close friends. Sophie wore a purple dress and held the rings, her face serious with responsibility. Emma wore a simple maternity dress that accommodated her belly, and Marcus wore the same suit he'd worn to Sarah's funeral, which felt right somehow, an acknowledgement that his past and present could coexist, that loving Emma didn't erase his love for Sarah. Their son, James Marcus Holloway, was born on a Tuesday morning in March. Emma labored for 14 hours, with Marcus beside her the entire time, and Sophie waiting anxiously in the waiting room with Rachel. When the baby finally arrived, healthy and screaming, Emma felt something in her click into place. This was her family, this complicated, imperfect, beautiful family. Later, when Sophie came in to meet her brother, she approached cautiously. She stared at the tiny, red-faced infant in Emma's arms for a long moment. "He's really small," she observed. "You were even smaller," Marcus told her. Sophie reached out a tentative finger, touching James's tiny hand. He grabbed it instinctively, and Sophie's face lit up with wonder. "He likes me," she said, awed. "He loves you," Emma corrected. "You're his big sister. That's forever." Sophie climbed carefully onto the hospital bed, nestling against Emma's side to get a better look at James. Marcus sat on the other side, his arm around both his children, and Emma felt a fullness in her chest that she'd never experienced before. This was what she'd been waiting for without knowing it. Not the perfect romance or the ideal circumstances, but this messy, real, hard-won joy. Epilogue. Full circle, 2 years later. Emma found herself back in that same coffee shop where it all began. She'd come alone this time, needing a moment to herself while Marcus handled bath time for both kids. She ordered a latte and sat in that same corner booth, looking at the space where she'd waited 2 hours for a man who never came. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her photos. Sophie at her 5th grade science fair, presenting a project on genetics. James taking his first steps. Marcus laughing at something Sophie said. His face transformed from that exhausted, grieving man she'd met into someone who'd learned to carry joy alongside sorrow. A selfie of all 4 of them at the beach, sandy and sunburned and happy. Her phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Remember when I set you up with Michael and he stood you up? Best disaster of your life, huh?" Emma smiled, typing back. Actually, a guy named Marcus showed up instead. "Changed everything. Still the best love story I've ever heard," Rachel responded. "You available for coffee next week? Normal people coffee, not blind date disaster coffee." "Always," Emma typed, then looked up as the door chimed. A young woman entered, glancing around nervously, checking her phone. She chose a booth in the corner, not the same one Emma was in, but close, and sat down to wait. Emma watched her check her phone again, adjust her hair, practice her smile. She was preparing for a blind date, Emma realized, hoping for connection, terrified of rejection, putting herself out there despite every reason to stay safe. Emma wanted to go over, to tell her that sometimes the best things come from unexpected places, that the person you're waiting for might not be the person who shows up, but that doesn't mean it's not exactly who you need. That love isn't about perfect timing or ideal circumstances. It's about showing up scared and trying anyway. But she didn't. Some lessons you have to learn yourself. Instead, Emma gathered her things and headed home, to her family, her life, her beautiful chaos. She'd waited 2 hours in this coffee shop for someone who never came, and instead found everything she'd been looking for in the man who arrived for someone else. Sometimes, the greatest loves begin with the best kind of mistake. Showing up in the wrong place, at the wrong time, for the wrong person, and discovering it was exactly right all along. As Emma drove through the city streets toward home, toward Marcus and Sophie and James waiting for her, she thought about that drawing Sophie had made so long ago, the day we all stopped being alone. It hung in their living room now, surrounded by photos and artwork and evidence of a life fully lived. They'd all been alone once. Marcus in his grief, Sophie in her loss, Emma in her carefully constructed walls. But they'd found each other in that coffee shop, through mix-up and timing, and the simple act of choosing to stay when leaving would have been easier. And now, none of them were alone. Now they were home,